Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the intermediate level class for REDCap. Thanks for joining, whether you're here in person or you're on our Zoom session. Just a couple things to make sure that you remember. Please keep, if you're on the Zoom session, please keep your connection muted throughout the presentation. However, you're welcome to use the chat window to ask any questions. We do have people watching, and we'll try to make sure that we address all your questions as we go through. So let's see what we are doing here today. There's a lot that we go over today in this class. So again, I will try to move quickly like I did yesterday, and I will try to make sure that most everything that we discuss is something that you will be able to play along with at home or here in class. We're going to start with something called version control, and along with that, I'll show you the codebook that is available to you. We'll copy and delete a project just so you know how to do that in case you ever need to copy a project and or want to delete a project. We're going to create a couple other new instruments. One of them will be in a way different than we've created an instrument in the class, in the beginning class. We'll look at some ways you can get some blank or filled PDFs of your project. And then we'll get into branching logic. Branching logic is something everybody likes to know how to do. It will be very short. It's very easy, but it can be very, very intensive and comprehensive for your project. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to get into surveys. Surveys are, I could talk for 4 hours easily, nonstop, and still not cover everything there is to discuss about surveys. So this is a limited class, but I will give you as much as I can to make sure that you can get started successfully with surveys and understand conceptually how they get set up and what you can do with them. So we'll take a little time with that. And then right after that, we'll talk about longitudinal studies, which are projects that collect data at certain predetermined points in time. So if you wanted to collect data using one of your instruments at 1 week, 10 weeks, 50 weeks, whatever, you can reuse that instrument over each one of those events, which is our next topic. But events and longitudinal studies are together. They are part of the same animal. After that, I'll throw in repeatable instruments, which was a wonderful upgrade that REDCap came out with about a year and a half or so ago. I'll touch on the arms of a study, how to set up a role for your permissions so that you don't have to keep assigning individual permissions over and over again if they're the same. My example will be if you were having students in your project and how you can create a role for student and then just assign people to the role rather than all those individual permissions. Data access groups are the same things as sites. So if you were going to do a study and you needed to collect data from different institutions, and each institution data needed to be walled off from view from those in other sites. That's called a data access group, and I'll show you how to set those up. I'm going to try and touch on a calculated field for you. We'll do a BMI. point out the field comment and history log, which a lot of times people could go ages and never even know are there. I'll talk a little bit about the difference between development and production, what that means to your project and how it works for you. We'll look at the file repository and try and get all that in today. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and open up REDCap. And go ahead and log in. All right. Hopefully everybody is logged in then and can see either their My Project screen or their home screen. The first thing we're going to do is open up our project from yesterday. You should see your project from the beginning class, or if you didn't take the beginning class, that's fine. Any project that you have, we'll take a look at. So I'm opening yesterday's project. The first thing I want to show you is the code book. So the code book is accessible up here in the left. All right, in this project home and design area, there's this thing called codebook. If you click on it, it will show you every single variable along with the field label and the attributes of that variable. So in this case, if we look at gender, we'll see it's a radio button and the different responses that are available. Drop downs, check boxes. So you can see the types of all of these different variables, and this is printable. So if you needed a printable, some people refer to this as a data dictionary. REDCap kind of looks at data dictionaries in two different ways. This is the first way. This is called the data dictionary codebook. But there is another data dictionary that we will talk about if you take the advanced class, which is a very powerful way to work interactively with some of the architecture of your project in bulk, being able to change things easily and quickly. The code book is not, is read-only. You can't make any changes to it. You can, however, collapse information and then expand it. Also, if one of your instruments is a survey, it will let you know in the code book that it is a survey. Okay, from here, let's go over to our designer. I'm going to get to that through the top left also, that link that says designer. So now we're at the online designer tab. And we're going to make a bunch of architectural changes to our project. If by chance we start down a road and we've been working on our project for an hour or two, and we start seeing that, boy, I don't like where we're headed. I really wish I could go back to where I started instead of having to delete everything and try to remember how it was when I came in this morning. Well, what you want to do is before you start making a bunch of changes, there's a button up here called Create Snapshot of Instruments. If you click on that, it will immediately create a link for you and give you a date and time when it was created. If you click on the link, it will show you all your project revision history. The project revision history is held in a data dictionary, not the code book, but a different kind of data dictionary that we will get to if you look at if you attend the advanced class, or you can look up the data dictionary in various places in the help or online somewhere. But this is the data dictionary, and you don't need to know how to use it as far as this class goes. However, if you've made a bunch of changes and you want to go back, you can send me an email at redcap@email.arizona.edu and ask us to please revert back to a point in time, and we will be happy to revert your project back to that point in time for you until you understand how the data dictionary actually works and how the revision works. But until then, as long as you click the button and have the history, we can take you back to any point in time. Now, the data dictionary is a complete snapshot of the architecture of your project. So what that means is it's all the fields, all the labels, field types, branching logic, alignment, all those different aspects that go into the design of your project, which is what I refer to as the architecture of your project. It has nothing to do with the data. So it's not going to be saving any data, because if you need to restore your project architecturally to a point in time, then that's where you want to use your project revision history. So from here, let's step back over. Let's go to our project setup and our online designer again. Okay, so we're here. I'm sorry, let's go back to the project setup, and then right next to it, we want the other functionality tab. Okay, to get to the other functionality tab, you need to be in project setup or project revision history. So if from the other functionality tab, now I would like to copy the project. So when I click on the other functionality tab, the first button is copy the project, an exact duplicate of the project. So let's say you wanted to copy it. Maybe you were starting a new study and you wanted to use the same layout, the same architecture from your previous project with maybe some minor changes. It might be best for you to copy the project. Maybe you want to copy it and play around with changes and make sure that you don't touch the original. All you need to do is click on the copy. You do have to change the title, so I'll just call it copy. And then you have the option of also choosing to copy all your records, all your users, and you can read through all these things, all these different things you can copy over with your project. So I'll go ahead and copy it, and it tells you in green the copy is successful, and you see the name of the copy right there. So now you play around, and you can also see, if we look at the record status dashboard, there are no records because I chose to not include those records. So if I come back to my project setup tab, and I've played around here, and now I'm done with my copy, and I want to get rid of it, I can go to the other functionality tab. Again, only this time I'm going to scroll down towards the bottom, and you'll see under project management, the very first button is delete the project. So if I click on delete the project, it will give me a few different opportunities to change my mind. I'll type in delete, click on delete. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. And when I click on the close button, it will take me back to my projects. Close that, and here I am at my project. So I'm going to go find my project, my original, and then open that up again. Now, some things to say about deleting projects. Let's say that you delete a project and you've been working for about an hour after you deleted the project, and something just looks wrong to you. you know, something about your project just is not striking you as being the way that you thought it was going to be, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, I deleted the original and I did not delete the copy. I have been working in my copy, and this has happened. So if it happens to you, don't feel bad, because there's a history of that happening. The good news is all you have to do is send us an email at redcap@email.arizona.edu and explain that could we please place that copy or that original back online for you. Because what happens when you delete a project is actually a pointer gets created, and then your My Projects shows you all the projects that do not have that pointer attached to it. So basically it just hides it from you. However, I can see your deleted projects, and they live for about 30 days after you've made the deletion. So if for some reason you need a deleted project returned to your My Projects, please just let us know. We'll be happy to replace it for you. It's a very quick and painless process. All right, so that's deleting a project. I'm going to create a couple new instruments now. I want to go to my online designer. And first I'm going to create a small instrument that I'm going to use in the presentation a little later today, this morning. I'm going to click on create. Well, it's this morning if you're here. It's not this morning if you're overseas. All right, so I'm going to add an instrument. I clicked on the create a new instrument button. I'm going to add an instrument here. I'm just going to call this EKGs. This is a drug study, and it is actually a cardiac drug study. So I'm going to create my new instrument, and then I'm going to add a few fields to it. I'll click on the EKGs, and I will add a field. My first field will be a text field, a text box, and I'm going to put EKG date so that I can track the date of the EKG. And if you remember, dates and comments and other boxes, you should always qualify, because you will have them over and over again, that kind of field. So EKG date, and then I'm going to use the validation and say month, day, year, because that's the format I started with, and then I'll save it. And there's my nice little EKG date ready for me to enter data into. Below that, I'm going to make this a file upload. Again, this is about 4 from the bottom, file upload, and I'll just put EKG tracing. And a variable name. And that's all I need to do here. This will give me the opportunity to upload an actual tracing so somebody else can review it if that's necessary. And then I'll add one last field. I'll make this a notes box, and I'll just say interpretation. Okay, so this lets somebody take a look and then interpret it. I'm going to make sure before I leave here, I'll align it to the left to make sure that I get the full value of that text, that comments note box, save it, and now I've got a place for my interpretation. Okay, so that's all we're going to do with that instrument. That's just one we're going to use later. Now I want to return to the list of instruments using that blue button up near the top. You can see I've got my 3 instruments, And now we're going to add an instrument in a totally different way. So there are many instruments that are standardized. If you're doing clinical research, you will more than likely come across a time when in your study you want to use a form that is being used all over the country or world or within your field type. And Vanderbilt has created a library of instruments that you can look at and see if it works in your study. So if we look right below the create, okay, there is an import option, a new instrument from the official REDCap shared library. I'll click on the import and it will take me to the Vanderbilt shared library. Just glancing, it's alphabetized, so you can start seeing there's all kinds of different instruments in here, and pages and pages and pages and pages of them. So I'm going to want to filter my search. A common instrument used by researchers is the PROMIS form. So I'm going to type in PROMIS and just search the library, and you can see that there are all kinds of PROMIS forms. Now, you also can see that there are different languages. Remember, REDCap is very global, so it's certainly not limited to just English instruments, so you can find all kinds of different instruments posted here. Adaptive instruments, pre-scored instruments. Adaptive instruments are ones which are scored, but they only can be done one question at a time. These are surveys or instruments that you aren't going to be able to edit. But there's plenty here in case you want to add to a PROMIS form or make changes to a PROMIS form, you can do so. I'm going to filter this a little further just for my situation because I want something easy. I'm going to look for the PROMIS parent. Where am I here? Yep. PROMIS parent proxy, SF. Okay, I'm just typing that in. Only because I know that there's something easy here that I want, and I'm going to go to the second page, and I'm going to grab this pain behavior 8A. It really doesn't matter if you're just grabbing something else, that's fine. We're not really going to use it, but I want to make sure that you understand how this works. I'll grab the pain behavior 8A. Now, I'm not sure this is what I want. So I can take a look at this PROMIS form and view it as a web page. And I can see, oh yeah, this is exactly what I want to add to my project. So once you've decided on that, there's a button that says import into your project. There is all this legalese. You will have to scroll all the way to the bottom, and you will have to check the I agree with the terms. If you do not scroll all the way to the bottom, the I agree and I do not agree buttons will not be working. So click on I agree with the terms, and now it takes you to a window that says it's basically ready to add it to your project. It has not added it yet. So click on the add button. It takes you to the window that says the instrument was imported, and then you want to return to the previous page. So you return to the previous page, and here is your PROMIS form in your project. So that's how you can take advantage of the shared library. There is so much out there that may help you, and especially if you're using something like the PROMIS form. Okay, so I'm interested in some PDFs. I am doing a clinical study. It's a drug study. I'm working with pharma, and I'll have a monitor. So if I look at, there's a number of ways to get blank PDFs. Let's start with, we're at the online designer. And notice there's an option here to view PDFs. So if you just want a quick blank PDF of an instrument, click on the PDF and you will have a blank that you can put in a binder. If we go to our record status dashboard and we open up a record, I'm going to open up the record homepage. The homepage is the list of all the instruments for just this record, and you get there again by clicking on the subject number or the record ID, whatever the link will take you right to that form. And from here, you have an option with the drop-down to download PDF of record data for all instruments, if that's something you want to do. Notice that also here is where you delete a record. If you don't see the delete record, remember, it's only because you have not given yourself the permission to delete records. All you have to do is give yourself that permission, and you can find it on the record homepage. The last place is I'm going to open up one of my forms here, and there are all kinds of options within the open instrument where there's data. If you click on the download PDF of instruments, there are options for data entry form blank, data entry form with saved data, all data entry forms with saved data. So if you, again, need something for a binder, this is the place to go. Open up a record and an instrument for that record, and you will find all kinds of PDF options for download. By the way, once you click a button, just so you know, clicking all over the place isn't going to make it go away. You have to click on the button again to make that go away. Some people go crazy doing that too. Okay. Let's go ahead and start talking about some branching logic. I'm going to go back to from here, I can click on Modify Instrument, okay, and I can actually modify this screening form because that's the form I was in. I'm going to modify this. I'm going to scroll down. This is again from yesterday or a beginner's class. We have a race and an option of other. So here is where we're going to put the other. However, there's no need to show it unless somebody has checked the other button. So we're going to hide it when it's not checked, show it when it is checked. So the green two-sided arrow is the branching logic button. You always apply the branching logic to the field that you want to hide or show, not to the parent, not up here, but on other race itself. So I'm going to click that two-sided arrow, and it's going to take me to this window. Now, please do not try to start using this the way Vanderbilt has it set up. I never can figure out why it's set up this way. The default is opening you to advanced branching logic syntax and asking you to programmatically decide your branching logic, which is crazy. You don't, it's the only thing that I disagree with Vanderbilt on, and it didn't used to be this way. What you want to do first is go to the drag and drop logic builder. This is where 99.9% of my users, including myself, want to be. Now, first thing I want to show you is that there is a drop-down box here, and that drop-down box lists every single instrument from your project. So it's asking you to display all the field choices from the following instrument. So you can set up branching logic based on a field result on any instrument. So if, for example, you had on your screening form a gender of female, and 5 forms later you only wanted to show questions based on whether they were female or not, you can use branching logic and have it based on responses to questions on any instrument that you would like. So in this case, below here are the field choices. So what it's showing you is every single possibility that exists on this screening form. And I'm going to scroll down here and find race, and here is race other. I'm going to drag and drop that over to the right window. So it says race other here, and I'll save it. Okay, now you'll see above the area right next to the variable, you'll see branching logic. You'll see the code, the programmatic code for that, that you could copy and paste if you wanted to have multiple fields use the same branching logic. The beauty of branching logic is that you can use it as deeply as you want. So let's say that you select gender as male. You can have a group of questions show up that are only male related, and then based on one of those answers, a whole nother set of questions come up with branching logic. So you can nest the branching logic as deeply as you want. A couple things to note. One, you cannot make a hidden field a required field because it's hidden. Can't be required. So you'll start getting errors if you do that. The other thing is there is an option that we explore in the advanced class where you can set defaults values for a field. You can't set a default value for a field that is hidden. That's also, where can we find resources about the advanced branching logic syntax? Okay, I'll tell you more. A question was asked about where we can find resources about advanced branching logic syntax. I'll explain that in just a second. So there are a couple limitations about branching logic, but that's it. Other than that, you can nest as far as you want. And at a glance, I'm going to go back up to my record status dashboard, open up one of my records, and we'll just take a look. Notice that there is no other race being shown. If I click on other, there is the other race. All right, I'm going to step back a second. I'm going to modify this instrument so I can go and take a look again at the branching logic. And just let's touch on quickly the advanced branching logic syntax. So the advanced branching logic syntax is created after you use the drag and drop. Now, if you were copying and pasting, you can copy and paste your information here. But the advanced branching logic is can be built directly from the drag and drop logic builder. The options that I did not show you that make it more advanced involve using alls and any's. So this is the same thing as and or in logic. So if you wanted this variable to be shown if race and female were true, then you would use the all. If you wanted it race or female, you would use the any. So you can build your advancing branching logic syntax there. If you feel the need to use the branching logic advanced syntax yourself, have at it. I just find that more often than not, it imparts an error since the easy is right here. And they are the same. It's just how you go about programming it. So that's the advanced branching syntax. Let's see here. So let's get into surveys. This will take a little time. So let's sit back and I will try and be as clear as I can. This is one of those places to make sure you stop me if you don't see what I'm doing, you don't understand what I'm doing, because surveys also are easy once you know how to do it, of course, but they're really meant to be something that is user-friendly for people that need to build a survey, and you can build them very quickly. So I'm going to go to my project setup tab, and if I want to use surveys in my project, the first button under the main project settings says use surveys in this project. You need to enable that first. Take a quick look at my online designer and you can see that there are 4 columns here, all right? If I come back to my project setup, click on enable, then come back to my online designer, you'll see there's now 6. Okay, so.
We'll see. I don't know. I don't know what the right way to do it is, but I don't blame you for getting the hell out of it. Well, I mean,
never. So there are, once you've done that, you should be able to see a button that says enabled as survey. Okay? If you don't see that, then you have not enabled the survey. The other confirmation that you set this up and turn this on is over here on the left. A new link was created called Survey Distribution Tools. If you don't see that, then you need to go back and enable surveys in your project. It will light them up as green. Red means they are disabled. Green means they are enabled. All right, I'm going to go over to my online designer. And now I want to make my screening form a survey. And I mentioned at the beginning, in the beginning class, turning an instrument into a survey is as easy as clicking a button. And here it is. I'm going to enable this as a screening form, and I could save my changes right here, and I'd have a survey. However, there are a number of options here, and I'm sorry, I usually try to set this up first. Like, give me a second. I want to show you some examples. 1 second so we can look at some examples while I do this. One last thing here. Okay. So let's come over here. Now, the first option here is the survey title. Let me try and, I think I can move this. All right. First option here is the survey title. All right. Here is an example of a survey. This is actually the first survey I ever did. Here is the title. You can just this. That's the title. You can change that to anything you want. This is another survey that was done. This is the title here. This is another example of a survey. There is no title, so you do not have to have a title. Yes, well, I'll show you that when I get to the question was about branching logic in this instrument or this survey that we're looking at, and I'll demonstrate that. Below that is survey instructions. You can decide what you want to see here, and you have a nice set of word processing tools so that you can make this say whatever you want. Some people do a whole consent form process all in the instructions. Here, in this survey, these were the instructions right here. In this survey, these were the instructions. And in this survey, there are no instructions. So again, you don't have to have those. Survey design options, logos. I feel that logos generally make the survey look a little bit more professional. For this La Posada one, this was, again, the first one I ever did. I just went to their website and copied their logo and put it here in their logo option right here. Choose a file. For this, I just made this up in Photoshop. I mean, it doesn't look all that professional anyway, but, you know, I made that up and put that there. If you're a University of Arizona employee, you would certainly want to use their branding requirements. I don't use this instrument, this survey anymore. It's just for demonstration purposes. And then over here, this is just the logo from the Center for Biomedical Informatics and Biostatistics. After that, you have the option of using what's called enhanced radio buttons and checkboxes. So the default is standard radio and checkboxes, and there's an option for enhanced. And as an example of enhanced, if we click on that, you can see what they look like. So I, for a long time, when teaching this class, would suggest that probably the standard was sufficient. This is an example of all the standard options. Then this, again, example of standard options. And then I had somebody start working for me who is a design guru and started using the enhanced buttons, and I started realizing, holy cow, these are really nice. Very professional looking. Now, what you're seeing here with the mouse overs and the changing of colors is not out of the box. However, I'm showing it to you as an example in case you want something like that. It's a little piece of code that you put in your label, and we'll show you how to do that if it's something you want. Otherwise, the enhanced buttons do look just like this, and they can be very attractive to your survey. Underneath that, there is the size of the survey text. Default is large. There's normal and very large, but I just want to call to your attention At the top of every survey, in the top right-hand corner, there is an option for a user, a survey recipient, to resize the font themselves. So in case they are visually impaired or need, a bigger font, they can resize it themselves. The font of the survey text, pretty self-explanatory. There's a drop-down. These are all the possibilities that you can have for your font. Survey theme. Okay, so we're going to be looking at this little tiny window here below. You can change your theme yourself. There are some canned themes. You can scroll through them, see what they look like, and maybe choose one of those for your project. This is standard. This is what the standard looks like. This is the red brick option that I played with. And this, which I always like to show, which I think looks so nice, this is also just standard with some enhancements. But once you do this, you can customize this even further. You can change page backgrounds and text colors and background colors for all these different things. So you can really let your inner creator out if you have creative skills. I am not very creative myself with that, which is why, thank goodness, I have somebody that is good at it. I'll exit this. I'm going to go back to my default and move on here. Question numbering, that's pretty self-explanatory if you want your questions numbered. Question display format. All right, we mentioned this in the beginning class. We created a header yesterday. So if you had a survey that was 50 questions and you wanted to break it up into multiple pages to make it easier on the user, there's an option here for one section per page. And remember, each one of those pages is broken up when it hits a header. So the La Posada project was an example of that, and I just stuck headers in wherever I could. Notice that when you use that option, you get page numbering up at the top, and you get page navigation at the bottom. So next page, previous page, you can move around. But I tried to put these into some kind of category. Obviously, they didn't break up exactly the same. You could have put headers called page 1, page 2, done whatever you want. These were just something that I put in to break up the project into pages. Allow participants to download a PDF of their responses. Again, fairly self-explanatory. When they finish the project, they get a printout, a PDF that they can download and see all the questions and the responses, that just as a confirmation of what they said on the survey. Survey-specific email invitation field is not something that we get into in this class. For required fields, display the red must provide value text on the survey page. So you remember when you say something's required, it puts this little red must provide value. I'm sure there's a benefit to hiding that on a survey. I just haven't been able to figure out what it is yet. So if you want your users to try and figure out why they can't submit their survey because they haven't filled out a required field, then I guess I would set that to no. Otherwise, let them know that their field is required to make sure that they put a response in that field. Allow survey respondents to view aggregate survey results. You've all seen this kind of thing where you've been on MSN.com or ESPN or some website and they ask you some question of the day. What's your favorite color? Red, green, or blue, and you respond, it immediately takes you to a graph of some kind that shows you the percentage of people that have responded in certain ways. And if you enable this, there are a variety of of settings. You need a minimum of 10 responses before you start showing this. So all of this is our options. The text-to-speech functionality, this allows for people who also may be visually impaired. And this is what you get, and I think that you'll all be able to hear this. So if you enable it, you get this little
first name.
box
To register for REDCap training, please complete the form below.
So it will read to you text-to-speech. So that is the function of that option. Survey response limit. So let's say you only want 100 or 200 or 300 responses, and then you don't need or want any more. Then you can change this so that you get a number of responses, and then decide if you want only completed responses or partial uncompleted responses. So that's something you also decide. Time limit for survey completion. Okay, so this is maybe not what you think it is. It doesn't mean that it's a timed survey. Doesn't mean you have a certain amount of time to complete it once you open it. It means from the time you send it, how long before it expires. So it's something like that. And then the survey expiration, this is a date and time at which the survey becomes no longer enabled. And save and return later. So this is an option where you can, instead of at the bottom where it says previous and next, there's another button that says save and return later. So let's say in this case, as you can see in this survey, there's 18 pages in there on page 9, and the doorbell rings and the dogs start barking and the children start crying, and you smell something on the stove and you're like, holy cow, I cannot finish this survey, and your first thought is to just destroy it and get out of it. But then you see at the bottom there's a save and return later, and you're thinking, okay, well, I'll do that. You click on save and return later, and it asks you your email address. You'll put in your email address, and then it will send you an email with a link and a second email with a password, so that you can click on the link, put in the password, and get back into this survey securely and continue on answering your questions. So that's the save and return later option. The one thing it does allow to happen is to get partial responses for those people who don't come back and complete their survey. So it's something you may want to think about. Auto continue to next survey. This is something a lot of people use. I'll click on it just so I can show you how it looks, but auto continue means once this person finishes this survey, it will automatically open the next survey on the list of your instruments. And again, I'll show you how it looks. Redirect to a URL. This allows you to redirect to your home page or some other web page when they're done. Survey completion text, again, self-explanatory. You can say anything you want here, along with using the nice word processing tools. And so I'm going to just, the send confirmation email. This means that when the respondent, person filling out the survey, completes the survey, they will get an email, okay? Not you. If you want to get an email letting you know that the survey is completed, it's a different process, and I will show you how that happens, but this is not it. So I'm going to save my changes. And now you can see that this is enabled as a survey because there's a little green shield here with a check box in it. And this little down arrow next to it means that the auto continue is enabled, and if the consent form was enabled, it would automatically open that next. Okay, so we've created this. One thing before I forget about surveys, especially this first one. Now we're going to find out that we could post this screening form on a website somewhere with a link and have people fill this out. So to do that, there is a survey distribution tools link that's been created. And if I click on that, it takes me to a public survey link. This link right here can be used on a website, and people can click on it and start filling in your survey and submit it, and so you get all kinds of responses based on, you know, some advertisement on your website or whatever. If we open the public survey, we can see what it looks like, and this is what our survey looks like right now. Okay, there's no logo. This is just a basic screening form. If I fill some stuff out, and submit it. Okay, this is what they see. Thank you for taking the survey. Let's look at our record status dashboard real quick. We see now that there is a new record that's been added. It's been auto-incremented, number 3, and there is a different kind of circlet. This one has a white checkbox in it, and it's green. If we look at the legend, it's completed survey response. So if I click on this and take a look at it, you can see the response is here. Now, notice that the complete has been created just by virtue of finishing the instrument, not because every answer was filled in. Okay, it would have required the date of birth, but other than that, you can get responses like this unless you want to force things to be completed. One of the things that I want to point out about a survey is there are 2 kinds of surveys. There are surveys that are anonymous and surveys that are identifiable. So if you send a survey out and you do not put any kind of question on it that allows you to return to that person somehow that filled it out, like an email or a phone number or something like that, then it's anonymous. So after classes, you will probably get an email from Colleen that will ask you about the class and what did you think of it and whatever, and you can write whatever you want about the class. There's no email address on there. There's no names. And so there's absolutely no way for me to know who is responding. They're totally anonymous. There's no IP address that I can find. So if you want to contact somebody, make sure that you include an email address. I have seen this happen with people that create surveys. They forget, or they don't really think about how they're going to contact somebody after the fact, and they don't include an email address or a phone number or some way to contact these people. And then after they get 10 or 12 and they get ready to contact them, they find that there is no way. So they have to go back and start from the beginning again. So if you want to get back in touch with somebody, please make sure that you have an email address. Also, if it's essential that you get back to them, make it required. Okay? If you have, if I'm going to go to my online designer here for a second. Again, I'll get here from the top left. And if you want to be notified that a survey has been completed, there is a button here. All these buttons were created just by you clicking on the Enable Surveys for this project. These 3 buttons were created. Actually, these 4 buttons were created, but there's a survey notifications option that you can click on, and then this is a list of everybody that's associated to your project. You can decide if one of these email addresses, so I have 3 email addresses associated to my account. Maria has 2 associated to her account. You can pick one of those email accounts, and now I will be notified when a survey is completed and submitted. Now, how did I get 3 emails in here to choose from? Because there's no way for you to type in an email address, and how come she has 2? So let me just step out of surveys for just a second. I will come back. I'm going to go to my to the home page, or to my projects is just the same. If I come to my projects in the top right, there is something called My Profile. If you look at my profile, this is all the information about you which you can change. So if I spelled your name wrong, or my team spelled your name wrong, or we put something in wrong, or you changed your email address, you can change it here yourself. But notice below there's an option for a secondary and tertiary email address. You can put in here departmental email accounts so that you can use them for your notifications. You could put in a personal email. Let's say you've your team set up a Google mailbox. Whatever. You can have 3 email addresses associated with your account. So if you want to make those changes, add them yourself, and then you will be able to add them into, once you click on this drop down, and this propagates into all kinds of different areas for surveys and notifications and whatever. So now that we have this, we're looking at our survey distribution tools, and now we've seen how we can use this as a link and put it on a website. I'm going to come back to my designer. Now I want my consent form to be a survey. So I'm going to enable that. I'm just going to save the changes here. We've already been through this. That's all it takes. Now notice that once the screening form is completed, it will automatically go to the consent form. There are ways, just so that you know before somebody asks, there are ways for you to skip forms or do whatever. This is would be a result of using something called an external module. And we touched on that very, very briefly in the beginners class. There are a bunch of plugins that you can have, but there's one that will allow you to skip forms based on certain logic. So if you need help with that, please don't hesitate to reach out at redcap@email.arizona.edu, and we'll help you with that. Now, I want to put my consent form on my website. I want to put it on a different website. I just want to get consent forms. So I'm going to come over here to my survey distribution tools, and I'm going to open my public survey. And wait, that's my screening form. That's not what I want. How do I get to my consent form? The answer is you can't. So this is sort of why I showed you in the beginning class. Remember, we moved these instruments up and down. Now I'm going to take my consent form and move it on top, right? It's the first instrument. That means this is where the ID is generated for this record. If I come over to my survey distribution tools, look at my public survey now, it's my consent form. The first instrument can be placed as a link for your project on a website, but not any other subsequent instrument. I come back to my designer again, move these up and down. So now my screening form. So I had somebody that had a nice project. They had 4 instruments. They basically asked similar questions, but from different perspectives. They all 4 of those instruments needed to be posted on a website. One was relating to self-referral about a situation. Another was was an instrument that was a referral from someone else about someone else, but they were all, in the same type of questions, and they all needed to be posted as links. So the only thing that person could do was to create 4 separate projects so that she could post those links. There's no way to post a link on a website, like generically pulling information, except for the first instrument. Okay? Now, I've collected information on my screening form. I now want to send out the consent form as a survey. That's fine. It's just that you can't post it as a link that anybody can click on. Now we're going to just direct our consent forms to go out after our screening forms. So one place I want to point you out, there's a couple ways of going about this. One place I want to point out is back to our survey distribution tools. There is something called a participant list. If I click on my participant lists, I see something odd. I see no emails. Strangely enough, though, there are 3 records, and I know I've got 3 responses, and I actually have one that looks like that survey. So something is not just quite right. How can I show who these people are? So I'm going to come back to my project setup tab, okay? Because I need to know what the email address of each one of those participants is so that I can contact them. If I scroll down about halfway or so underneath this enable optional modules and customizations. All right, I'm here. I want to designate an email field so that I can send survey invitations. Okay, this is a key thing people miss. Designate an email field to send survey invitations. I will enable this. And up at the top, it says choose an email field. Well, I know I have an email field. I'll click on this, but there's nothing there. Well, that's a problem. I'm going to get out of that. I know I have an email field. I'm going to go back to my online designer. Why do I not see my email field? I go to my screening form and I go down to my email field and I open it up. If you remember yesterday or in the beginner's class or at some point, I told you, do not indicate in the validation that it's an email because I want to point something out later. I'm going to now validate that as an email address and save it. Okay, it's now defined as an email field. If I come back to my project setup tab and I scroll back down and go to that designate an email field and enable this and look, there is my email field. So the only reason the field will not show up there is if you haven't designated it as an email field. So now you know if there's nothing there, You simply have to go find the email field and designate it as an email field you just forgot. All right, so now, whoops, let me grab that. Now I've got my email field. I'm going to scroll down and save that. And it will say now the field that is currently designated as email. Now, this is how you're going to be able to contact, communicate with the participants that have filled out your surveys. So if I go back up to my survey distribution tools now and look at my participant list, now, oh, there's one. I've got an email, but I don't have email addresses for the other ones. So why do I not have email addresses in here? Everything, you've done everything right. I see that record 1 is complete. So let me go to my record status dashboard and look at number 2 and open that screening form up. And sure enough, there's no email address in there. Okay. And yeah, I thought I hit C. It won't let you make a mistake there. Okay, so I've got that. If I go back to my survey distribution tools now, look at my participant list, now I've got somebody else. So obviously, the only reason an email doesn't show up at this point is because it's empty. Go back to my record status dashboard, find record number 3, and fill in their email. Oh, yeah, this is something else I wanted to point out. All right, when surveys come in, they are not necessarily editable. It used to be that surveys were not editable at all, maybe a year and a half or so ago. There was a theory that if somebody filled out a survey, nobody should be allowed to change it. But it turned out there's plenty of reasons for them to be changed because surveys don't necessarily go out. They could be done in a clinic. There's all kinds of different ways to utilize a survey. So you should, I think, be able to see the edit response button. But I want to step back again a second and let's look at the user rights. I'm going to get there off on the left here, and I'm just going to open up a record for somebody and edit their user privileges. And notice that once we enabled a survey, a new column was created off on the right, which says edit survey responses. So if you want somebody to be able to edit a survey response, they must have the permission. So that's just something that you're going to want to remember when, so ideally you've gotten your surveys created before you've added your users, but if not, just make sure they have permissions to do edits if that's something that you want. So I'll come back to my record status dashboard. I'll open up my survey. I'll edit, and notice also in the banner, does tell you exactly when the survey was completed so that you know. If you want to edit this response, you click on that. I'm going to come down, just type in okay, save and exit this form. And now if I look at my survey distribution tools, my participant list, everybody is in here, shows me their record number. So what can I do with this? I want to send out my consent form. Up at the top, where next to participant list, you will see a drop-down. There are 2 options. There's the screening form and the consent form now since we enabled it. If I look at my consent form and I want to compose a survey invitation, I can do so, and I can choose from my participant list who I send my consent form to. I can come over here. I can decide when it should be sent, you know, immediately or a specific time. Do I want to resend it if they don't respond in a period of time? Compose the message. Who is this from? And here again is where these different email options come into play. You can pick one of these. You could have a departmental email address show up as the sender so that it doesn't all come back into your personal email. And then a subject, a message, and then you can send the invitation. So this is one way of sending invitations. Okay? Another way that is automatic, if I go back to my designer, my online designer, notice a new button gets created once you indicate that it's a survey, and it's called automated invitations. So we could automate this consent form by clicking on this button, and you get a similar screen to what we were looking at before with messages and all that. However, on the right, now we can create conditions. So let's just say that whenever the screening form is completed, then I want to send maybe after 5 days, let's say, you're going to send out the consent form, and you will use the email address for the person that you're sending it out to, and you can turn on the activate your reminder or activate the survey invitation or not down here in the bottom right. So let's say you are not ready to go with it, but you want to set it up. You can just set it to not active, and it will save your settings. Okay, so that's how to automate your invitations. There are a number of other nuances and tools that you can play with for surveys. This is as far as we're going to go for this particular class. I know this is a lot. If you have questions and need further help, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at redcap@email.arizona.edu. However, if you're doing basic survey postings, everything you need to know is just the enabling of the survey and any configuration, and you're good to go, and you can post it. You can also, just so you know, you can use this in a distribution list. I mean, you can just copy the URL, you have a distribution list, and you can then plug in this link, and everybody can just click on the link and then respond to you. So there's lots you can do with this once you have your survey created, and all your responses will be easily viewable for you, and then exported out for analysis if that's what you want. All right, so that's our survey presentation, and now we're on to longitudinal studies. Okay, so a longitudinal study is again one where you're collecting data at different points in time. So I'm going to go back to my project setup tab, and I'll turn off my surveys just for this. I'm going to disable them so we don't get too confused here. And now I will enable the button underneath it, which is use longitudinal data collection. As soon as I enable it, you will see two new buttons appear down below here called Define Your Events and Designate Instruments for them. An event is that point in time where you want to collect data. If you have a longitudinal study, you will need to define those points in time that you want to collect data. So I'm going to click on the button that says Define My Events. Okay, I'm going to scroll down here a little bit, and it has started me off by defining event 1, which I don't really want. I want to change the name, so I'm going to click on the edit button here. And I'm just going to call this my screening. I'll just leave it screening, and that will be my screening event name, and I'll save it. So now I have an event name called screening. Now, I want to add, just for our exercise, we'll add 3 events. I'll just say visit 1, and just so we know what that means, I'll put 7 days and add this event. And again, you can name these anything that makes sense to your project. Next, I'll add visit 2, and I'll say 90 days, just again, so we have an idea of what we're talking about regarding visit dates, and then finally visit 3. And I'll make this 180 days. All right, so this is roughly a 6-month study. So I've got a screening event and 3 other points in time that I know that I want to collect data. So if I look at my record status dashboard right now, it is going to look weird. I've got my screening event, but no screening form. I've got a consent form in here, but I don't have anything that makes sense. All my other visits are gone. So I'm going to come back to my project setup, and there is a piece that is essential when you're doing a longitudinal study, and that is designate your instrument for your event, the button right next to defining my events. Let's take a look at that. You'll see a grid. If an instrument is not associated to an event, it will not show up for data entry. It absolutely must be associated in a longitudinal study. To do that, there's a button that says Begin Editing. I'll click on that, and now it turns into checkboxes. So for my screening event, all I really want is the screening form and the EKG. That's it. That's all I'm going to get on a screening form. In fact, I'll leave the EKG off. On the visit 1, I'll get the consent form and an EKG. For visit 2, I'll get an EKG and a promise form. And then visit 3, I'll get an EKG. So that's my study right there. If I save this and take a look at my record status dashboard now I see that there are different events, and I can see what instruments need to be filled out for each one of these events. Now, once you set up your events and you start collecting data, data is tied in to a variable, okay? So let's just talk a little bit about data and your architecture and how REDCap is set up. So REDCap has 2 servers. One holds the architecture of your project, the other holds your data. The connection between the 2 is the variable name. If you start collecting data and then you decide, I don't like my variable name, I'm going to change it, and you do, and you go back and look at your record, the data for that field will have disappeared because you just broke the link between the 2 servers. The link was that variable name. All right, so if you put the variable name back into your project, your data will show up. Just by changing the architecture of your project does not mean you delete data. It means you sever the connection between the 2 pieces. So that's the variable name. There is one other piece that occurs when you have a longitudinal study. There's the variable name and there is the event. Those two together hold that piece of data in place. If you decide to change the event that a instrument is associated to, you will sever that connection. So it's not just the variable, it's the variable and the event. I have had people go in and start, after they've started collecting data, and decide that they want to make some changes in events, and they do so, and then they tell me that they just lost a bunch of data. Well, you haven't lost data. There is no way for you to lose data short of deleting it, and you have to specifically delete your data. And even then, I have backups. So if you accidentally delete something, come to me, redcap@email.arizona.edu, and we will help you with that. However, this is a big one. People constantly think that they have lost data because they make these changes because they don't understand the link between those three things: the variable name, the event, and then the data itself. So notice right here, I had data in a consent form. That data disappeared once I moved it into this event because I broke the connection. It was originally set up for just a basic first event, which would have been a screening event, and then I changed it and it disappeared. The data didn't really go away. It's in my database. It's in your project, but you're not going to see it because you severed the connection. All right, so just keep all that in mind about how those work together. All right, so now I've got these visits. I'm going to come back in on day 7. I'm going to fill out my consent form. Yes, the consent received. I uploaded it. I've made my signature, and I've got comments. This is complete. Notice here before I pass, there are 2 buttons here, save and exit form, and then there's a drop down on this other button. There's some other options here. You could save and stay on this record, save and go to the next record, save and exit the whole record. Save and stay means this. Now I'm still here, and save and exit, go to the next form is obvious. Save and go to the record, next record would be obvious. Save and exit the record takes you out of the whole record itself. So if I go to my record status dashboard and look, now I've got a circlet in the consent form. Excuse me. Okay, so now I'm filling out these different instruments on these different events and collecting data. So what if, excuse me, one second. Okay, what if, because this is a drug study, and I'm very concerned if someone has some chest pain as a result of the drug they're taking, I want an EKG of them, regardless of whether it's visit 1, visit 2, visit 3, whatever. If they start having chest pain on day 14, I want an EKG and I want to be able to track it. How can I do that? Let's start by going back to the project setup and creating a new event. And just for this, I'm going to add an event called EKGs, or EKG event. Okay, something along those lines. Okay, so now I have an event. If I look at my record status dashboard, notice I do not see the event. Why do I not see the event? I do not see the event because it's not associated to anything. I'll come back to my project setup, come in here to designate instruments for my event. See, EKG has nothing associated to it. I'll begin editing it, come to EKG, add it, and save it. And now if I take a look, I can see on my record status dashboard, there is an EKG event. Notice I don't have it set up in my mind as like visit 1, visit 2, and there's no 180 days or 90 days or anything. There's just an event sitting out here. It's going to be a placeholder. So what I want to be able to do is collect those EKGs any point in time. I'll go back to my project setup. There is an option here under Enable Optional Modules. The very first one is Repeatable Instruments and Events. I'm going to enable the repeatable instruments, and I have all my events and all my instruments within the event available to me. I'm going to take my EKG event, and I'm just going to repeat my instrument. Yes, I could repeat the event, but for this class, we're just going to pick the instrument and check the EKG. Don't worry, if you don't understand this quite yet, you will in a minute. I'm going to save this. Let's take a look at my record status dashboard. Doesn't look like much has changed. Maybe alignment here looks a little strange, but anyway, it looks just the same. So I come in on day 14, and I've got some chest pain. So I'm going to come to my EKG event, which is outside of these events. I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to say that I got an EKG today. I'm going to upload my file, and the interpretation is normal sinus rhythm. And it's complete. And I'm going to save and exit my form. Here I'm back at my record homepage, and this is kind of a nice place to look at this one particular record. I see something new here in my EKG event. I see a little plus sign outside of it. Also down below, I see something saying repeating instruments. And I see that there is an instance of an EKG. If I click on it, I can see the one I just entered. All right, so about a week later, I have some more chest pain. Come to my record status dashboard where I can see everything about everybody. I go to my EKG event, but now I'm just going to click on my plus sign. I'm going to add a new instance of this because I'm not within my visits yet. So I'm going to click on this, go here to my calendar. I'm going to say, 7 days later, I upload my EKG, and I have some occasional PVCs. And I'm going to say that's complete and save and exit the form. And now if you look, you see there are some concentric circles, really showing you that there are multiple values here, multiple instances of EKGs, and down below, if you are in this record homepage for this one record, you will see that there are 2 instances. If I'm in the record status dashboard, looking at all my participants, you can see clearly that we have more than one EKG here, and if I click on the circlet, I can go look at any of these. So I've got chest pain one more time, and it's 7 days after that. I'm here on Christmas. I get an EKG, only there's nobody to interpret it. So I'm just going to leave this incomplete at the moment, save and exit it, and now look at what it does. The color has changed to blue, which means there are many statuses, not just complete. And if I look down here, I can see that there's a coloration of incomplete that needs addressed. So I can come back whenever, click on that, and interpret the EKG, and then mark it as complete. A little trick for these is similar to what we did. Remember when we identified our record status dashboard and we pulled the names in here? We piped them in. Another trick is if you're dealing with dates, if we go to our project setup and we go back to our repeatable instruments and are setting that up, and we modify that, there are custom labels we can do. So for mine, I'm going to take and pipe in the date of the EKG. Remember, you can pipe in the value by just putting the variable in a bracket. So I'm going to put EKG underscore date in that bracket, in square brackets, and save it. Okay, now if I look at my record status dashboard and open up record 1, now if I look at my EKGs, I can actually see the dates that these were done. So you can manage your study very thoroughly and see everything you need at a glance by a couple little tweaks, piping in a value here or there, and then see at a glance what's going on with your project. So that is repeatable instruments. Very, very powerful. Up until they created repeatable instruments, you had to create, some people would create literally 100 events so that they could capture those one-offs if they happened. So great addition when they got to the repeatable instruments. I'm going to go back to the question? Yes. Okay, the question is, why wouldn't you create another EKG instrument, give it another name, and plug it into the timeline? Okay, first of all, you don't want to recreate an instrument that's already been created. The EKG would be identical, okay? You're collecting the same information. Second, you can't plug it into one of the visits because the date that you're collecting the information for the EKG does not fall on one of those visits, and you have no idea when that EKG is going to be needed. So you need something that is totally random, and so you can collect it whenever, and by repeatable instruments, that's how you address that kind of situation. If you're not going to have a situation like that, then you don't need repeatable instruments. But if you do, that's the way to get around the fixed visits, because that's what an event is. We're just creating an EKG event as a placeholder. Okay? Good question. All right, I'm going to come to my project setup tab and go back to defining my events a minute. And just point out, if you have a study that has arms, and an arm can be, 2 arms of a study could be something where you want to group some of your data into different sequences or groups. So for example, if you within one project, you wanted to have compared drug 1 and drug 2, or a control and an intervention group before or after event, something like that. You would create a second arm by clicking on the tab. Once you add an arm, you give it a name. Hang on. How did I get to the arm? The arm, I got to this through defining my events. I went to the project setup, and here I grabbed the button for defining my events. From here, there is a tab called Add New Arm. I'll add the arm, and then I'll just put in an arm name and save it. Once I create the arm, I still have to create a whole new set of events and then designate the instruments for the events. So it's like a whole second project aligned with your first project. The drug 1 and all the data for drug 1, drug 2 and all the data for drug 2. That's the difference between two events. Once, if you decide you do not want the arm, afterwards you can delete it. Out here, there's a link. Just delete the arm, and you're back to your first one. Okay, those are arms. Let's look at roles. I'm going to come back to my user rights. I'm going to get there through the navigation menu on the left, user rights. Now, I'm going to have some students working on my study. I want to create a role for the students, so every time I add one, I don't have to give them specific permissions. So there is an area here that says create new roles, and I'll just type in student and then create the role. Now it takes me to my permissions. I'm only going to do this once for students. I don't want them to have project design. I don't want them to have user rights. Data entry, they can have some de-identified access. I'll scroll down. They have create record permission. They do not need delete record permission. And they can view and edit these forms. So I'll go ahead and create that role. Now I've got something that sits out here called student. If I want to add somebody to that role, there's no one associated to them, to that role at the moment. If I want to add a new user and assign them to a role right away, and this is a student, I can type in, start typing somebody in, take their name, assign them to a role. There's only one role created, student, and immediately they're added to the student role with those permissions. Okay, so you didn't have to go through individually and identify all their permissions. If you're creating roles, one caveat or one thing I would make sure that you are attentive to, I knew somebody that was very organized, which was great. He created numerous roles for his users. He had a number of users, and so he started out and created an administrative role with project design permissions. Then he created a role called user rights and gave that person user rights permissions. And then he created roles for coordinators and a role for data entry. So when he was done, the first thing he did was associate himself to the administrator role, and then began to apply the roles to other people. However, he found he couldn't. He no longer could assign anyone to a role. The reason was the administrator role, which had project design permission, did not have user rights role. So he accidentally locked himself out of being able to assign anybody to a user role. So Be careful about creating roles and assigning yourself to a role. Make sure that you do have all the permissions you need. Otherwise, you can lock yourself out, and the only thing you can do, send us an email, and we'll take you out of the role so that you can go back and start affecting things the way you want. If you are not in a role, then you don't have to worry about it. If you have a project with sites and you want to wall people off from different, from information entered from within that site, these are called data access groups. They are in the tab right next to the user rights, or they can be accessed on the left. They're called DAGs, data access groups. The data access group, let's say in this example, we have a study and we're going to be working with Northern Arizona University. We'll add that site, and Arizona State University, we'll add that site, and then University of Arizona, and that is a site. Okay, so now I've got 3 sites here, and I can assign my coordinators or my personnel to a specific site, and then they will only be able to see information about that site. To do that, I'm going to assign my user here. I will select someone, assign them to a group, and I will assign them to NAU and assign. And now you can see that in this DAG, NAU, one person is assigned, and when she enters participants, only she will be able to see the data on those participants, or anyone who is not assigned to a site. If you're assigned to the ASU site, so if I assign Colleen here to ASU site, now Colleen will not be able to see what Maria has entered. Maria will not be able to see what Colleen has entered. Those sites will be walled off from each other. If you want to delete a data access group, first you must remove a user from a data access group, and to do that is the same way that you put them in. You just go in reverse, you take them out of a data access group, and I'll take Maria out of this data access group, and then you can delete them off on the side with red X. And I'll just go through here real quick, delete these, and those are data access groups. All right, let's go to our designer. Oh, hang on. Distribute surveys. Okay, so the question is about how instruments, how data is linked to a record when instruments repeat themselves across different time points or whatever. So in a longitudinal study in particular. So let's just quickly talk about that. I'll look at my record status dashboard. So there are these different events, and here is this repeating event. If I open an instrument in an event, notice that it automatically connects to the record ID from the record status dashboard that I just selected. So if I am looking at record 1 or record 2 or record 3, if I'm in record 3, when I click on the instrument, it automatically is linked to this ID. The ID is the unique identifier across all of these records, and so when the data is exported, it will all be linked to this one record. That's how they are connected to the same participant. And if there's further questions on that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at redcap@email.arizona.edu. Yeah. Second arm. Good question. So the question is, if you create a second arm, is there a quick way to copy all the instruments from your first arm to your second arm? There is a way, but not that you have learned yet. When we do data dictionaries, then I can show you. But otherwise, no, you would have to add each one individually. Yeah. Okay. All right, so we did roles, data, access group, calculated field. So let's go to we're in the online designer now. Okay, and I'm going to go to my screening form. I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. And I'm going to add 2 fields here. Well, I'm going to add 3 fields, but first I'm going to add 2 text boxes. The first text box is going to be weight. And I'm just going to, in parentheses here, say pounds. Just so whoever's doing the data entry knows that there is a choice between when you're entering weight, whether you enter it in pounds or kilograms. I'm not discriminating against kilograms. I'm just defining here. So I'm going to put weight. And as a field note, we haven't used this yet. I'll put pounds. And we'll take a look at what this looks like. So now you see that little field note sits below the data entry box. And you can see what increment, what value type you should be entering in here. And underneath that, I'm going to add another text box that says height, and I'll put this again in inches so that we know that I'm looking for a value in inches and not centimeters. Height, which is certainly an option. And I'll do this the same way. All right, so now I've got my height and my weight. I'm going to want to now create a calculated field for a BMI. I'm going to add the field here, and this is going to be the third one down, calculated field. My field label is going to be BMI, and I'll use that for my variable name. And now there's a new window here sort of that's been created called calculation equation. The first thing I want to say is I highly, highly, highly recommend that you involve yourself with this link that says, how do I format the equation? There is so much useful information about calculation in this help and frequently asked questions on calculations. All of this is available to you, and I use this all the time. So avail yourself of it. In this case, I'm going to create an equation which is weight divided by height squared times 703, which is the equation for a BMI. So I'm going to put in a left parens, and then remember, if I want to recall the value of a variable, I put it in square brackets. So I'll put in square brackets weight, and as I start typing, REDCap attempts to be very helpful and shows me what my options are. And if I click on weight from this little drop down, it will automatically populate for me, which is great, except it would be nice if it would do that for all the variables that I'm going to type in here. It only does the first one, so don't look for the rest of them. So I'm going to put a division sign and then a left parens again, a left square bracket, and put height in those square brackets, and then a multiplication sign and a left square bracket for height again, and a right square bracket and a right parens, and At this point, I have weight divided by height squared, but I want you to notice down in the bottom left, this area right where my cursor is, there's nothing there. As soon as I put my right parens in, watch what happens. I get a valid. This is very important because this is evaluating your equation and telling you whether it will run or not. Of course, it can't tell you if it's accurate or not, but it can tell you if it will run. As soon as I enter the rest of this, begin to enter the rest of this equation by typing in a multiplication sign, it will indicate that I have a syntax error. Again, trying to be helpful, but as soon as I start typing in the rest of the equation, it will automatically evaluate to valid, even though I have a couple numbers left to type. So I've got weight divided by height times height, which is in the parens, times 703, validating appropriately. I'm going to save that. And now I have a BMI, and I can view that equation at any time, either in design or in real life, by just clicking on the link, and it will show me what that equation is. And if I go to my record status dashboard and open up my screening form and go down and enter a weight of 175 and a height 72 inches, as soon as I leave that field, the BMI will calculate automatically. You can add rounding to this so that it rounds to a 1 digit, 1 decimal or 2 decimal or no decimal. All that's part of the equation rules that you can view on your own. If you look next to all these variables, you'll see that there are two bubbles. There's one that has an H in it and one that just is a bubble. And you would just not necessarily process that. I'm going to change my name here real quick. I'll change it to Jerry. And I'll save and I'll stay on this. Let's look at these bubbles real quick. I know we're almost out of time. I'm going to look at the H bubble, which is the data history. If I take a look at that, notice that it now shows me a complete history of any change in value that was made to that variable. So in case you see some data that doesn't look quite right to you, you can take a look at the history and see if there was a change made. Also, there is a comments option, and you can make notes, name changed after further information, and add the comment, and the bubble color will change a little bit, and now if you mouse over it, you can see that there is a comment there. All right, I have 1 minute. I'm going to just quickly tell you that there is, when you create a project, it automatically is set up in a development mode. You can see that right here. Development means that you should be making all your design changes and then doing all your testing, and when you are done, you would move it into production to enter live data. If you try to enter data at this point, notice you will see the project is currently in development, real data should not be entered. That's just a disclaimer, it's not a requirement. If I decide I want to go to production, please don't do this, but I'm going to show you what happens. If you do it, you can't reverse it. If I do it, I can reverse it. If I go to my project setup tab and go to the bottom, I can move it to production. There is information here about production. If I move it to production, I can keep all my data or delete all my data. if I keep all my data and move to production, now you will see that there is a green production option here. And if the big difference is if I go to my online designer, now I can no longer make changes unless I enter the draft mode. If I enter the draft mode, then I can make changes. When I make changes, no one will be able to see them until I have submitted the changes for review. And once you've submitted the changes for review, other people will be able to see them. That's the difference between production and development. And again, if you accidentally find yourself going into production too fast and you want to move back to development, you will not be able to. But if you send me an email at redcap@email.arizona.edu, I can move you back to development, and that's happened many times, so don't hesitate. We're out of time. Thank you so much for your patience and staying with me for this. Hope to see some of you tomorrow. The advanced class is kind of esoteric. If you're just new to REDCap, I'm not sure that how much you'll really be interested in it, but if you are, I will then see you tomorrow. So thank you again for joining me, and I'll end the session now. Thanks again.